I think what's driven me for a lot of my life is this spiritual feeling, and also a sense of caution about that. I do believe it is necessary to satisfy spiritual hunger for spiritual experiences, and it is also necessary not to become a glutton. So just like we could see that, as I've said before, that hunger is related to driving the body to, get nutrients, and yet it can become, uh, it can, you know, I'm looking for just the perfect word, but, it can lead to gluttony, right? Hunger out of control. I think the same thing is true of the spiritual feeling, and I think that even more so. I think it's very, very dangerous. So at a young age, I think what's attracted me to philosophy, to nature, to mathematics, to programming, was that when I contemplate those things or learn things, I run into the spiritual feeling. And, I plan to talk a lot more about what I think is to this feeling, but in my case, it always tends to have a big picture feel to it. But I don't think that's always genuine. And often it's mixed with attraction to a person, or to ego, or to other things, and it can make it seem like it can magnify something and make it seem like it is the big picture. And I think that the spiritual feeling can lead people to do just horrendous things because they think it's in the interest of some sort of ultimate truth, some big picture truth. Um, on one hand, I expect that this is just the DNA. The DNA has reason for human beings to entertain big picture illusions, right? How else are you going to be motivated to go to an unknown land? How else are you going to be motivated um, to die for your community, protecting your community? Um, maybe there is another way, but the DNA is, in my mind, notorious for coming up with these emotional motivators to accomplish its goals, so that you can see someone, be attracted to them, and know in your heart it's the one person for you. And that's because the DNA is like, well, close enough, it is the one. Let's see if we can make it that way. But I'd be lying if I didn't say I have more faith in the spiritual feeling than that. But I repeat, I think it's very dangerous, and I've seen it drive a lot of people crazy. And my love of nature comes from the fact that when I interact with nature, I feel this spiritual feeling more than when I avoid nature. And yet my love of science, while it's enabled through this path of natural philosophy and this other love of nature, I think it's motivated by a desire to ground myself. Because I think people can become truly evil following their spiritual feeling. It can go awry, and I would call that an unhealthy spirituality. But I wouldn't deny that it was spiritual in nature. And I would always advise that you not simply pursue spiritual feelings because they feel that way. You should always judge how it is relating and interacting with your life. Just as with hunger, using that as an example, you can certainly pursue your hunger and your tastes, but you need to integrate that with what you know about whether you really need a sixth meal of the day or whatever, whether you really need another Girl Scout cookie. Um, it might seem like hunger, but that's an unhealthy hunger, whereas there is certainly such a thing as a healthy hunger. In the case of spirituality, as I said, I think it's more dangerous than that, and more confusing, less clear what it is we're trying to get. Um, just to put a rough shape to it, I think it's there to inspire us to feel connected to the universe and to give us a sense of the big picture and to help us do big picture things. And I believe that it's a need, that it needs to be satisfied. The spiritual feeling needs to be satisfied. And if it's not satisfied, it will turn on itself. And this is one of the things that causes it to become unhealthy. so I believe that we're in a culture for thousands of years, not just America, not the West, but for thousands of years, that has worked on a warlike principle. And I think an unhealthy kind of spirituality can motivate war. But once the war is won and those people are subjugated, it is uh, necessary to separate the subjugated people from their own healthy spirituality. And you need to instill hate and fear so that the big picture becomes one of a destructive world. And that ultimately is self-destructive for the individual, weakening them and making them easier to subjugate. Now, recently I have mentioned what I think is a relationship between war and slavery and rape. And I think slavery and rape, I believe I admitted, I'm using the schema of these things. Dinah Cat Loves Me was objecting to me calling people slaves that might not specifically be claimed to be property out loud by the people that are oppressing them. And I reject that objection. I think that in the early 20th century, when the Anglo-Persian Oil Company discovered oil in Iran, they went in there and basically enslaved the Iranian people and put them to work in the oil industry. And I believe that even though they didn't call them property and they didn't say, hey, it's slavery, because slavery, calling it that was passe, that was not okay anymore, they still treated them as property, making decisions for them that those people, that are free people, would make for themselves. Now, somebody could say, oh, but those are just economic arrangements. And to use the words Dinah Cat Loves Me had suggested, it's just a less than ideal, it's a less than ideal labor situation. It's a less than ideal job. No, if you want to say the whole world has been in a situation where people are making those sorts of decisions for their workers, well, that's why I say that we're in a world of slavery right now. All right. The world works on a slavery basis. And the fact that the word slavery has been made taboo, and it's like, well, we don't call them slaves anymore because there's no glory in subjugating people and making them your slaves. It used to be like, oh, you were the man, you forced those people to be your slaves. Now it's like a bad reputation. Forget it. Okay, you're a free person. These are wages. Well, people don't really have freedom, right? People don't have freedom. And in the big picture, in the small picture, an individual will not fight for their freedom because they're going to die and they'll go, well, I'm not going to have my freedom if I'm dead, right? But in the big picture, people will fight for their freedom, right? People will fight for their freedom. They will not let themselves be subjugated in the big picture. So you must separate them from their spirituality. Now, that doesn't mean there's an afterlife. No. Well, maybe when people are willing to die for their freedom, maybe a logical part of that is that their spirituality being, a DNA created thing, like the DNA is a big fat liar. It'll say, oh, don't worry, the afterlife, whatever. There is no afterlife in my spirituality, but there is a fighting for freedom. There is being willing to die for freedom. There is a benefit to that for other people. There is a reality to the big picture and to benefits and detriment measured against this big picture, right? And a person has to be separated from that in order to be oppressed generation after generation. Now, not a particular individual can be put in chains, right, and beaten into a task. But that will break down, and the numbers will add up in the favor of freedom when a subjugated people has the will to insist upon their freedom. And that's the direction that spirituality goes. I don't think a natural, healthy spirituality uh, enables slavery. I don't think there's a spiritual feeling that gets fired off because of, I should be a slave. No, there's senses of service and all kinds of things that can be exploited and turned and mixed with spirituality. But I don't think that it naturally goes together. And so, in the systematics of it, we have been separated from our spirituality and told we could worry about that when we die. It's all about life after death anyway, for a very practical and specific purpose. And in some cases, consciously so. In some cases, consciously so, that spirituality was offered to the people as an opiate, right? To dull the pain of the here and now so we would keep working inefficiently, but at least we're working and giving the productive value of our lives over to other people that, in a spiritual view of things, we would never do. So I think that I'm going to focus on this message and explaining to you the importance to me of having a healthy relationship with spiritual desires. Now, one of the main issues and one of the main reasons I have studied physics and science so closely is to remain grounded. I do not believe it is healthy to have a strong spiritual feeling and then just go off like suddenly and that's good enough. I don't believe that. That's not good enough. You have to have a way of rationally measuring your relationship with nature. And ultimately, nature is not what you guys are thinking, not this mechanistic view. It's not this. Nature is all of the sense and perceptive spaces. Spaces, right? Canvases. You can have a color canvas, right? You can have a canvas of sound, right? There's also flavor, the canvas of flavor, and there's canvases of various kinds of hate and love and hunger and lust and disgust, and we could enumerate them all day and night. As far as I know, there's thousands, if not infinite, number of these kinds of feelings, and we've spent so little time sorting them out, really, that it's hard to know which are fundamental and which are recipes of fundamental feelings. But I think that spiritual feeling is one of the fundamental spaces in which you can paint a spiritual picture made of feelings, in the same sense that red and blue and the colors are feelings. You could paint a picture of that. The same sense that the tones of sound are pigments that can be painted on a space of sound. Each one of these perceptive spaces that's different from the other, in the same way that color is different from sound, is different from taste, is different from hunger, is different from, the sense of beauty. I believe that I theorize that spiritual feeling is its own one of those. And that's because of the way I've experienced it and how it's motivated me. The way in which it's motivated me has not come without some doubt of that feeling. I do not believe I can have that feeling and a thought of, I must do this and then I should just do it. No, I must measure that against my natural philosophy. I must tether that on what I know, including from earlier spiritual experiences. So when I realize that I don't want to be somebody murdering an innocent, even for some greater good, even if some trolley is going to hit a bunch of people, I don't want to murder an innocent person. For a bigger picture, I don't believe in that. So when that comes up, I will measure my actions and a sense of, if I have a spiritual moment saying, but I will measure that against other feelings, other knowledge that I have about what matters, about the material facts, the material reality, right? Now, what matters when a person is just made of a stream of consciousness, what really matters, right, is their survival still. And how do you define survival in terms of a stream of consciousness? Well, one, that the stream of consciousness not be ended permanently. And two, that the stream of consciousness not be full of unpleasant perceptions like pain, right? Like pain and misery and sorrow and grief, right? And so it's a balance. And I think we are not thinking enough about this spiritual feeling. And let me tell you, the first question is, what is that feeling? And maybe the zeroth question is, do you know how to resolve and look at your own feelings? Can you look at your own feelings? Do you know yourself? Can you look at yourself? Because it's really important. It's important to be able to do that. And it's a lot like looking in the mirror. It's not a matter of looking in the mirror and seeing the most beautiful person in the world, right? It's not looking in the mirror and hallucinating that you're more beautiful than you really are. It's accepting yourself and getting back down to earth into what you expect and what you accept and and what you're working from there. And then to really know what is heinous and what is not. You know, it is not heinous to grow old, to gain weight and get wrinkles, right? Just as you weren't as beautiful when you were young either, you had issues with that. That kind of issue, to see yourself in some sense like as arbitrarily beautiful in that sense, that's not the goal. That's not what you're trying to do when you learn how to look inside your mind. You need to look inside your mind and accept yourself for what you really are and be able to see if you're following some sort of a big picture, decency in how you treat other people and yourself. And I think the spiritual feeling can help guide us in that direction in the same way that hunger can guide us to eating good meals, right? So it can go awry and can become a glutton for the spiritual feeling and trump it up, right? Or find it legitimately somewhere and consume too much of that. And if you do that, I believe you will go fucking nutcase and start, which will show in negative actions, negative destructive actions that you could use your other emotions to hold in check and keep sane with. But you can't just discard this spiritual feeling or else you'll become withered, right? And bitter and tunnel vision, too small of a vision. And you might even think you're following a spiritual path. And really, it's a spiritual pessimism that comes from having an unhealthy spiritual relationship with yourself. And that's not good.